I'm very honored to be here today to share with you my story about overcoming grief and trauma. My life had a very interesting start, I will say that. When I was 8 weeks old, living in New York, my father was driving us home from Long Island, New York, to Spring Valley, which is about an hour and a half away. And as we were less than a mile away from our house, we were stopped at the intersection. And as our light started to go, when our light turned green, and my dad went through the intersection, a drunk driver plowed the intersection and T-boned the car. Now, the force of the impact was so great, it pushed our car into a telephone pole and split it all the way up to the dashboard. So when the first responders arrived, they found my father, they found my mother, and they found my brother. Now, my brother was 3 years old at the time, and I was only 8 weeks old. And so they found those three, and then 10, 15 minutes later went by, and someone found me sandwiched between the door and the dash of the car. The four of us were taken to the hospital for our injuries. My brother did not have a scratch on him, which is pretty much a miracle. And my dad had to get stitches on his face from the windshield breaking, so on his nose, his cheek, and his forehead. And my mom was taken into surgery. As for myself, nearly every bone in my body was broken. My skull was completely fractured from one side of my head to the other. So the fact that I am 53 years old and talking to you today is nothing short of a miracle. And this is my greatest day because I'm able to wake up and share my story. My injuries were so severe, I was life flighted to another hospital in New York. So my dad was going through a horrible situation because the doctors were telling him, well, your infant son is touch and go. We don't know if he's going to survive. And my mom was fighting for her life. I received numerous blood transfusions, so many that my aunt lost count of how many I received to stay alive. And they had to put me on a special board and strap me down because I was all cartilage. And for all those parents out there, you know how precious your babies are, especially at 8 weeks old. I had to go back to the hospital for months afterwards to make sure I didn't have any brain damage. And all my friends would say, you might have something, but I think I'm perfectly okay. I'm normal. But despite all those injuries, I grew up to be a competitive swimmer. Went to college on a swimming scholarship in Ohio. I'm a comedian, an author, and a photographer, and a speaker. My mom, who was 28 years old, died the next morning due to her injuries. So now you're looking at a mother's child who never knew his mom because of a drunk driver. I never had that chance to run home from school and say, hey, mom, look what I drew for you, or hey, mom, what's for dinner, or hey, mom, three simple words, I love you, because someone made a wrong decision that day. I've dedicated my life to trying to prevent other families to go through what we have gone through. So for about almost 30 years, I've been presenting this program called The Magic of Life to high schools, colleges, military bases. For even the last 10 years, I've been talking to DUI offenders here in Ohio, and which has been a very remarkable experience. I never thought I would ever talk in front of drunk drivers before because I always saw them as the enemy. They, or he, Harvey Dennison, took something so precious from my life. It was going to be a certain situation that I didn't know how I was going to respond. But luckily, I include humor in my program, so I begin with some stand-up comedy and then we get into my story. So it's humorous, but also inspirational and emotional. And I think if we can take our pain, our tragedy, our trauma, and turn it around into something positive and make a change in the world, and I think we're doing something right. We all have powerful stories to share, and I've been blessed enough to be able to do it. I never set out to do this. In fact, when I was 15 years old is when I found out it was drunk driving, because my dad never talked about it. Because back then, men didn't talk about emotions. Even now, it's sometimes tough. But I went back into my dad's room to get his wallet, and next to his wallet was the press release. And that's how I found out I was drunk driving. And that put me on a path to do change. Even though it's extremely frustrating, because at times you read about how the numbers are going up for drunk driving here in the States, or in the deaths, and it's like, am I making a difference? But every time I share my story and you see the audience, or they come up after you and they want to hug you or give you a handshake or buy a book or donate to the foundation, which is the Magical Life Foundation, it's a blessing. And it's proof positive on how we can inspire others to make change. Now, despite my mom dying, my brother and I were raised by a Jamaican woman named Dolly. Dolly came into our life, which was supposed to be a part-time job. She's originally from Jamaica, was living in England at the time, came over to New York to visit her sister, and was there for 3 months. And my grandmother put an ad in the newspaper for part-time help. So this woman, Dolly, she answered the ad, and it was only supposed to be a part-time job, and it turned into a lifetime role, which was pretty awesome. She raised me and my brother as her own flesh and blood. So I have a white Jewish family and a Black Jamaican family, but it was just family. And she taught me about compassion, unconditional love, and what the human spirit could do if it's willing to do it. And I know we've been blessed. And you take a horrible situation of us losing our mom, and here's this woman that stepped into this role of motherhood, and it really helped out. Now, swimming was a good outlet for me. Humor is a good outlet for me. I use humor as a defense mechanism. When I was in college, I would swim angry, and it's not like I'm an angry person, but I was angry at God. I was angry at Harvey Dennison for killing my mother. I was angry at my father for never really wanting to talk about it. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized he couldn't. Um, on December 19th, 2012, he sent me and my brother an email stating, to even to that day, it was still too hard to talk about. And that would have been my parents' 48th wedding anniversary. My father passed away from Parkinson's in 2018 in January. My aunt, his sister, died 90 days later due to ovarian cancer. So that year was extremely tough because I was already trying to mourn for my father when 90 days later my aunt died. And that sent me down another dark, deep depression. And even throughout the years, I had certain plans to end my life. Never really got so close. I mean, those ideas were there, but this time the pain was so there, and it's not like I wanted to die. I just wanted the pain to stop, and this time I was close. But what stopped me in June of 2018 was thinking about my brother and Dolly, other family members, and I thought, I can't send them back to the cemetery 3 times within 6 months. So I made an appointment with a grief counselor who happened to be a friend of mine. And I had lunch on that week, and she said, she goes, you don't look well. And it's amazing when we're depressed or going through grief or any type of trauma where we think we have it all together, right? We think, it's fine. I can just hide this pain. But the people that know you will sense that something's not right. Even the eyes will do that. Because I remember doing a photo shoot, and my friend said, we can't use these pictures. You have sad eyes. And I thought I was trying to hide all that pain. So I made an appointment that week, and it was probably the best thing I ever did for my entire life. My grief counselor said, the very first question, she said, or the statement, she goes, let's talk about your mother's death and how that impacted all your relationships. And I was like, I'm not here to talk about my mom. I'm here to talk about my dad and my aunt. but she was right. I was 47 years old, and for the very first time, processing and working on my mother's death. I'm not married. I don't have kids because one of the reasons I saw the pain my father went through, and I never wanted to experience that. But I'm also pretty sure if we talked about my mother's death when I was a kid, as a teenager, processing then, things would have been a little bit different. And for 6 hard months, we worked together, not really overcoming, but processing my mother's death, my dad's, my aunt's, one of my best friends, John, who died as a result of being a drunk driver in 2004. That one was hard as well because he knew better. And yet, even though he knew my story, he still ended up being a drunk driver that took his life. So there was a lot to work on in terms of grief counseling. And at the end of the 6 months, my counselor said, "You look like a different person," and I felt like a different person for the very first time. I had the tools to help with my own depression, with my grief, with my trauma, and I did more reading about it, and I researched it, and I realized the trauma that I went through as an infant and the connection not having that connection with my mom would impact certain relationships. And I realized there was a cause and effect, that it just wasn't me. So for those people who are out there struggling, get help. You don't ever have to be ashamed about it. You don't have to be scared about it, especially for men who don't like talking about their grief and trauma. It's freeing, because instead of my depression and trauma and grief controlling me, you flip that switch a little bit. And especially important for men. I love talking about it because it's refreshing. I read a lot of Brene Brown's books as well about vulnerability. And even though I spoke for so long on stage to audiences about drunk driving and my mother, I never really did that deep dive into my depression and the trauma. And now talking about it for me is no different than talking about the football game or sporting event. And we should be able to normalize it. We should be able, as men, talk about our emotions and grief and trauma, because hiding it only makes the situation worse. So it's nice to talk about this to other men and other podcasts or just groups, and it's refreshing. So for anyone who's out there, don't be afraid of it, because your life means something. Your life is special. There's people that love you and care about you that don't want to have a memorial service. We don't want to write, I wish they'd reached out to me. I was one of those people. And I thought about my loved ones. I didn't want my friends who knew my friend John go through that pain all over again. So I thought about those people. And you think about, for my story, I'm pretty sure my mom didn't sacrifice her life back in 1970 for me to end mine sooner than it has to be. And I think any good parent would do that. And I really believe my mom saw that headlight coming and did something to save me. And my dad did his best for me and my brother. He was overprotective of me for a long time, and rightly so. But he was a different man. And I remember at his memorial service, cousins telling stories about my dad, and I was like, I wish I knew that guy. But he was totally different, and I saw what grief and trauma did to him. And I emulated my father's behavior towards grief and trauma. And I went, I can't do that anymore, because it's going to put me in the ground. And that's hard when you realize that, in terms of, yeah, you're one step away. So, I've been blessed to have my birth mom who gave me life, and then I have Dolly, who gave me purpose along with my dad. And we all have purpose, and be able to, again, make a difference in someone's life. It's valuable. So for those people who are struggling, no matter what it's with, weight, smoking, depression, and grief, just know that you don't have to go through it alone. There's people out there to help you, whether it's a family member, whether it's a total stranger. I'm a total stranger when I go do these programs, but yet I leave as, feeling like these people could be friends. And that's a weird situation when they're convicted for drunk drivers. And I have become friendly with some of them, and they made a horrible decision, and they have a chance not to kill someone. I always tell them, don't be the source of someone's pain and agony, be the source of someone's happiness instead. And I think we all have that ability to share. In 2019, I published my memoir, The Magical Life, a son's story of hope after tragedy, grief, and a Speedo, because I was a swimmer, not wearing a Speedo now. That would be kind of weird, but it's on Amazon. It's my story. It's Dolly's story. It's for anyone who has gone through trauma and grief. And it's a nice journey. And Dolly, God bless her, she loves telling stories. And I remember one time she was telling a story back in 2019. I was around my birthday. And she goes, I remember when you were in your cage. And I was like, cage? You mean crib? She's like, no, cage. I went, well, that explains a lot about my behavior these days. But the book, even family members who read it, they said, we thought you were always okay as a kid. So it's, so share your story. But my story, if you're hurting out there, you want it as a gift to someone, you can find it on Amazon. The foundation is themagicallife.org as well. One of our goals is to help kids impacted by drunk driving, because we had Dolly in our lives. Not every kid has that. So it's nice to try to give back to others when you can. So, I'm very happy to be here, especially as a 53-year-old, and looking forward to another year to see what my life will be. So, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on Global Speakers Talk, and I appreciate your time. And again, you can find me on themagicallife.org, the book, The Magical Life, a son's story of hope after tragedy, grief, and a Speedo. You can find me on social media, and let's chat.